welcome back. My name is Peyton and I'm currently working on Project Old Lovers. For those of you who are new here, I'm a speculative fiction writer. So in my last video, I mentioned I was having a hard time writing Act 2 Fun and Games, if you are familiar with Save the Cat. So my solution was to revisit that chapter and refresh myself on things I was forgetting, what I was possibly missing. And while that was helpful, I realized something while I was editing that video. This story could very easily go off the rails if I don't hone it in. And last week I was very much like, oh, it's fine. It's part of the writing process, which it is. But if I can make my life easier, why wouldn't I? Not to mention, I think this is one of the best things my AuthorTube journey has given me so far. The ability to reflect and see in real time my writing process with a new perspective, with fresh eyes on the actual situation that's happening. So why wouldn't I use that to my advantage? Now, writing the middle of a novel has always been the hardest for me. And that's always where I have stopped every single time. It's like I'm in this fog and I can't see more than 10 feet in front of me and it just keeps getting thicker. So I would like to finally break that cycle. So how are we going to prevent that? We are going to replot, but not just blindly. And we're not going to entirely scrap the plot that we have so far. I kind of blindly threw out in my last video my ideas on why I was struggling. And someone in the comments, thank you, kind of confirmed this for me. And they said that they had a similar situation going on where they were also struggling with subplots. And once they got that figured out, they were able and have finished their first draft. I'm talking about Jazz writing. She and I have commented a lot, DM'd a lot. I'm fangirling over her videos. Go check out her videos. So once we figured that out, we deducted what was the real issue, subplots. I deep dived further and found that other writers were having this problem. Mika's Writing has a wonderful video on subplots and was going through the exact same thing and has great advice. Go watch her video on subplots and go watch the videos she recommends. And together with those videos and a blog post that I found, we're going to put together a little writing Act 2 subplot plotting workshop today. There is a more concise way to say this, but that's what we're doing. So the order of our workshop is going to go like this. First, we're going to break down subplots. Then we're going to break down types of subplots. Then we're going to have brainstorming session part 1. Then we're going to identify themes in our story. Then we're going to have brainstorming part 2. Then we're going to talk about the 7-point plot structure. Finally, we're going to bring it all together and weave. So buckle in, kids, light your candles, get your notebooks, get your Scrivener open, your Notion, whatever it is you need. Grab a beverage and let's buckle in. So what are subplots? A subplot is a secondary story that runs parallel to the main plot and helps your character develop skills to succeed in the main plot. Assuming it's a positive character arc and not a Walter White Breaking Bad situation, which is a negative character arc. Subplots add variety, characterization, excitement, conflict. They help with pacing, and they can help portray themes in your story. Mastering subplots is kind of that certain je ne sais quoi that a lot of writers have. Not only do you need to have them present, but you need to weave them into your story and they need to be integral. If you can remove your subplot from the story, then you need to rework your story. That is not the point of a subplot. For example, if any of you have seen the latest Beetlejuice 2 or Beetlejuice, a lot of people want to argue that there is a subplot with Tim Burton's wife where they're like, that was so irrelevant. Like, that subplot could have been taken out. That was bad writing. But the thing is, if you've seen that film, if you know what character I'm talking about, that character was like a red herring distraction bad guy. We thought that was the bad guy that we were up against, so we didn't see the real bad guy coming. You're also going to utilize that bouncing ball we mentioned in the last video. Wins, successes, failures, losses, balancing those, because these subplots, this fun and game section is going to lead up to the midpoint, And that midpoint goes directly into Dark Night of the Soul, All Is Lost, the big bad moments of your story, like the really, really bad ones. This also means your subplots are a great place to include foreshadowing and just sprinkle that in there for those big moments after the midpoint and the end of your story. Okay, now I'm going to quickly gloss over the types of subplots. If you did your assigned reading, wink wink, go watch the recommended sources video. For the sake of this video, we're just going to gloss through those very quickly. Again, if you need more information, go watch those videos and come back to this workshop. I am going to talk about 4 different types of subplots, and these are like umbrella subplots: romance, conflict, revealing, and supporting. There's definitely more subplots than 4, but these 4 are the least confusing, best summaries of subplots that I've come across so far, especially for new writers when you can get bogged down in information and then go into paralysis analysis. So the first, romance, is exactly what it sounds like. It focuses on a romance between the main character and a side character, or even 2 side characters. It's often a B story that is present throughout the entirety of the story. Next up, we have conflict. This turns up the heat for your MC. It raises the stakes. It forces them to make choices and take action. It advances your plot. Remember that for pacing. Third, we have revealing subplots, which reveal and explain information about a character, a place, or a thing. This is so important for world building. You can also use this type of subplot to capitalize on certain themes. Again, themes in your novel. This type of subplot seems to be extremely important for avoiding information dumping, especially when you have a fantasy world or a sci-fi world with lots of new things to teach your reader about. Of course, this could also be used for a mystery. Or finally, we have supporting subplots. This is a subplot that follows a side character's goal that mimics your main protagonist's goal, but in a separate time or place. All I can think about is TOG's Tower of Dawn and how they turned a subplot into an entire book. All right, so those are the basics of subplot. We can take a breather from the heavy lecture, and go into more light lecture workshop style. So get out a notebook if you haven't already, or open up your Scrivener or Google Doc file, whatever you're using, and we're going to start brainstorming our subplots. So how do we do that? Easier said than done, right? Don't worry, I got you. So to start brainstorming your subplots, I would start on a high level. And by this, I mean we need to start with the promise of the premise. And by this, I mean we need to start with the main concept of your story. What do you promise readers? What would readers expect if they were reading a synopsis on the dust jacket of your book in the bookstore? Is it fantasy? Is it a romance? Is it a high fantasy world with dragons? Is it vampires and zombies? You see how these are big ideas? Take these, write them down. That's the first step. Let's take like 5 minutes to do that. Try and get as many as you can think of. so now you should have all of those promises, those big main concepts of your story. Next, you're going to do the same exact thing, but think about the themes of your story. If there's anything that didn't fit into that main concept that you know you want to touch on. We're only going to do 3 minutes for that one. Pause the video if you need more time. Big pile of sticky notes. I probably have way more than I need. I probably have some of these that are doing the same thing that I can reduce down onto one sticky note. So now we're going to enter brainstorming session part 2, and we're going to take a lot longer for this. So for this brainstorming section, I want you to take the last 2 steps, main concepts and your themes. If you haven't, put them on sticky notes or put them into columns with space to write underneath them. Because what you're going to do now is start generating ideas, things that can happen within those specific umbrellas. And you're going to keep doing this until you're happy with what you have. So this is probably going to take more than 10 to 15 minutes. But for the sake of this video, I will just be editing it down to that chunk of time. So I am back a few days later, so don't feel bad if you need more time than this video to continue plotting all of your subplots. That is what I did over the past few days in chunks, because it's a lot of thinking, it's a lot of brain work, it's a lot of time, and not all of us have huge chunks of time. You gotta work with what you can. So at this point in our workshop, we have all of our subplots, or at least all the major subplots we think we need for this first draft. Remember, you can still add, delete, fix in your second developmental draft. It's okay. So at this point, we are going to start weaving those subplots, and this is where Mick's video is going to really help make sense of things. In that video, she suggests using the 7-point plot structure to weave your subplots. And I know that can be a little bit confusing because I keep saying save the cat, save the cat, save the cat, we're following save the cat. But for this particular exercise, I think it makes sense. I've heard people say there are all these different story structures, but in the end, they're all basically the same thing. It's just a different way of thinking about it, and that different way of thinking works better for some people than others. And I think in this case, it works depending on the exercise that you are doing or what you're trying to figure out in your story. It's just another tool to utilize. So if you're not familiar with the 7-point story structure, we're going to run through that super quick. So these 7 points in the 7-plot story structure are the hook, plot turn 1, pinch 1, the midpoint, pinch 2, plot turn 2, and the resolution. If you remember writing essays in junior high, elementary school, your teachers taught you that the hook was something to hook your readers in. Kind of the same thing. It's the introduction to get them interested in your story. Plot turn 1 is the inciting incident that brings your protagonist to adventure. It's the call to action. Pinch 1 is when the stakes are raised, and often you'll introduce the antagonist, the villain, the major conflict or challenge that your protagonist MC is going to take on. This is starting to sound familiar to Save the Cat's story structure, because it should be, especially with the midpoint. Just like Save the Cat, the midpoint in the 7-point story structure is the turning point of your story. And then we go to pinch 2, when your major conflict takes a turn for the worst. This is also known as all is lost in Save the Cat. Then we go to plot turn 2. Your protagonist is going to discover something that's going to help them rise to the occasion, beat whatever conflict, challenge, villain is in play. And then you have the resolution. Your major conflict is resolved. I think major differences, if you are writing your entire story using the 7-point story structure, is how you start plotting. I believe with 7-point story structure, you start by plotting the end. But anyway, how are we going to use this to weave? If you've watched Mick's video, you already know. But basically, we're going to take all of our subplots and file them in. We're going to figure out what's the hook of each of these subplots, what's the plot turn 1, pinch 1, where's the midpoint, where's pinch 2, where's plot turn 2, and where's the resolution of all of these, because your subplots should have a beginning, middle, and end. So now I am going to take all my pieces of paper, and to make this hopefully a little easier for myself, I'm going to write the major plot points on these note cards. So now I'm going to divide them onto note cards and identify where each of these points are so that I can more easily weave them. And I think I'm also going to color code them so I can keep track of which subplot is which. Before I forget, again, a note on color coding. I'm going back to the types of subplots and color coding by that. So I'll be using black for the main plot, pink for romance, blue for supporting, yellow for conflict, and green for revealing subplots. Color code those and then start laying them out in a physical format. You could do this digitally as well and just color code, but for some reason, my brain is craving physical activity for this workshop, and I think that's helping me work through it instead of just staring at a screen and pushing things around. So that's what I'm going to do next. Now that we have all of our subplots divided into the 7-point plot structure, we're going to now weave. So I'm using physical note cards, like I said, to write all those down, which means I'm going to physically lay all of these out so that I can quickly pick up and reorder them while I'm brainstorming and looking at this. You could also use sticky notes, but just start laying them out, piece them together, and see what makes sense for your storytelling, for your pacing. Definitely pay attention to where things are wrapping up and where your conflict is occurring. This might change again after you write it, but the point is to get yourself enough of a roadmap if you're stuck writing Act 2 that you can finish Draft 1. So I have now laid out all my cards. I have an idea. I numbered them because I'm not just going to keep them all on my desk. I need space to work, and I like having the cards, but they are numbered in the order, in the sequential order, the chronological order that I would like the story to take place. I will be going into Scrivener and writing it into my scene cards, my chapter cards. So this was a very long workshop. If you're still here, thank you. I hope it was helpful. Let me know in the comments if this was, if you'd like me to do more in-depth workshops. This was really helpful for me and my story. I was feeling really stuck, and sure, I could have kept going and wandering blindly, but I feel a little bit more productive and prepared going into my writing sessions, and I feel like back on track. I did end up taking a week basically to do this whole workshop, which means I didn't increase my word count for my manuscript for this whole week, and that's okay because I would have had to scrap a bunch of that work anyway. I will say this did feel a lot like zero drafting and hardcore plotting. And I think in future projects, when I start a new WIP, I might actually do this before I start writing. But that's kind of natural. That's part of the writing process. You learn what works for you, what doesn't, and then you get faster at creating stories, and you get better at writing story arcs and character arcs. And I'm very excited to have gone through this process and this workshop with you guys and developed this skill a bit more. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for sticking around. And until next time, cheers.